Let me go to Mr. Tolman. How often does it happen? How often do we get the wrong person? You know, where Mr. Williams told his compelling story of how they were just wrong, and he was arrested and detained, I think he said, for 30 hours. So, I mean, I know the Huber family, the recent story of the couple in Alaska who were not in the Capitol on January 6th, but were their door kicked in, they were put in handcuffs, they were at gunpoint at one point in the during the interrogation. It was like a 4-hour interrogation. So I just want, and it was all based on facial recognition. So how often do we get the wrong person?
Well, one time can be too many, but certainly some estimate as high as 30%, but I actually believe it's more than that, Representative Jordan. And it's nice to see you again, sir.
You too,
it is, I believe, higher than that. I have represented 2 individuals, one of whom I'm fairly certain, and it's not, you know, we don't know about the ones that aren't publicized or the ones that, you know, are coming forward, but I have a client who was, you know, accused of going inside of the Capitol. He was not in the Capitol. I believe it was facial recognition technology that put him in law enforcement's, you know, investigation. And we certainly had to work backwards to show that he was not. And so I think it's more often than we know because it's not being reported.
Is Mr. Lee, do you know, is there any kind of, Mr. Tolman said 30%, is that, and we know there's a disproportionate impact on African Americans. Is it do you think it's a higher number than that, or is that probably where at 30% of the time this technology gets the wrong person?
Ranking Member Jordan, thank you for the question. We don't know, and that's a part of the problem. These technologies lack the requisite transparency and the requisite oversight for us to even know. Of the cases like Mr. Williams that we do know, you know, those are terrifying. But what about the cases that are maybe on a knife's edge that we don't know about right now? And so we do need more transparency and more oversight, specifically with facial recognition technology and its use by law enforcement.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to yield to our ranking member, but I mean, I'm concerned in a general sense that just the overall surveillance state and individual Americans, you know, just fundamental liberty, fundamental rights. But when you add on top of that the fact that it's wrong so often, to me, this is why if we can't come together in a bipartisan fashion, as I know we've been trying now for a couple of years, if we can't do that and figure out a way to put restrictions on this, limit this, particularly when you have all these agencies using the technology, they don't even know which technology they're using and whether it's private or what have you. I mean, there's just a host of problems here. So I appreciate Chairman Lee having this hearing, and I'm going to yield the remaining 2 minutes to our ranking member, Mr. Biggs.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And my question this time is to you, Ms. Frederick. Peachtree Corners, Georgia used AI-driven smart cameras to monitor social distancing and use of masks during COVID-19. With current technology, what prevents federal agencies or state and local government from using facial recognition, not just to use it for identification, but to track movement and behavior of law-abiding citizens?
I fear that's what's coming down the pike. And, you know, right now there are specific transparency measures and, you know, lukewarm, I would say, strictures on some of these uses. Ms. Goodwin talked very well about the PIA and SORNS and GAO's recommendations. Those are great start points, but at this point, there are no hard constraints on the expansion of a remit for these cameras. So the public safety remit, you know, it's huge. It could encompass all sorts of things. And clearly certain municipalities are taking advantage of that to interpret public safety as they wish. So unless federal entities are required to really submit those efficacy reports, those transparency reports that don't yet exist in a very rigorous fashion, then I fear many official entities will be allowed to interpret the use of facial recognition, interpret the use of digital surveillance in any way they can. And I will say quickly, you know, when I was at Facebook, the ethos of private companies and shipping these products, and this is the problem with private companies being used by federal entities, is you want to ship it. You want to ship it. You deploy these technologies as fast as you can and solve problems in the rollout in later iterations. That ethos is in direct conflict.
So, Ms. Frederick, thank you for answering that. I need to ask one more question because it deals with, and I want to talk to Professor Lauren real quickly. she had her hand raised with regard to the question on investigation versus arrest. And what has come to my mind is this notion of tainted photo lineups, tainted identification being used in investigation as predicate for making an arrest. Did you want to elaborate on that, Professor Lauren?
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Mr. Ranking Member. I will say just a bit more, and that's to say that I do think that it's possible, in theory, to think about a distinction in the use of the technology as an investigative tool versus forming the basis for an arrest, or put differently, a facial recognition match by itself forming probable cause, right, to arrest. But I think that from a regulatory standpoint, one needs to take great care in thinking about what strictures need to be put in place to create a meaningful distinction between those two things, right? So, for example, there are a number of agencies that currently say facial recognition itself cannot be the basis for probable cause. But then there are very few, if any, sort of strictures around what further investigation is required to build an independent case, right? Are there, for example, blinding procedures so that individuals who are then doing a subsequent lineup don't know that facial recognition initially matched the individual? If not, right, that's not a particularly meaningful independent check. And the last thing I'll say is that I think there's an important sort of intersection here between facial recognition technology and what we already know about the fallibility of eyewitness identification, right, which in over 75% of known DNA exonerations, there were now known to be wrong eyewitness identifications that occurred. So that's an investigative tool that itself is already quite fragile, right? And when used as a corroborating piece of evidence with the fragile facial identification, that should give reason for concern as well. So thinking about what strictures need to be in place to create a meaningful check on the investigative use of facial recognition is an important regulatory move.
And Madam Chair and Ranking Member Jordan, my time is long expired. Thank you.